Hi curious, and welcome back. It probably won't surprise many of you to learn that the British royal family is full of secrets, ones that have already seen the light of day and some that the members will probably take to their graves. The Netflix series The Crown has done a good job talking about certain events and people, albeit adding fictional twist, especially things that the general public had either forgotten about or wasn't aware of to begin with. Just as it has been the case of Queen Elizabeth II's cousin, Katherine and Nerissa Bowes Lyon, who had been placed in a mental hospital and the world was told that they had passed away. How many of the things did Peter Morgan's show get right? And what had actually happened to them? Is it true that no one visited them for decades? And why were they hidden? Stay with us until the very end to learn all about all of the royal mysteries. But before we continue, don't forget to turn on the notifications and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our future videos. So let's start with talking about the Netflix show before we dive into the not-so-distant history books. Because despite being loosely based on history, the show did do an accurate portrayal of the story with some minor differences. But if you want to know how else the show differs from real life, then you can check out our previous video, but for now, make sure to stay with us to learn more about this story. In the 4th season, Peter Morgan had shone the light on a quite ugly scandal. Now, for those of you who might not be up to date with the show, this is your spoiler warning. In the episode titled The Hereditary Principal, Princess Margaret, who is played by Helena Bonham Carter, had discovered that 5 of her and Elizabeth's cousins were secretly placed in a mental hospital back in 1941, and as far as the public was concerned, they had passed away. Margaret was struggling with her own mental health issues in the episode and went into a fit of rage as she confronted Queen Elizabeth, their mother, about the act of cruelty done to the family members. However, Queen Mother had a rational, at least to her, reason for the actions, having blamed it on the 1936 abdication and the fact that her husband was taking the throne meant that her own family was under scrutiny and the purity of their bloodline the subject of international interest. She had explained that her family, the Bowes Lyons, had gone from being minor Scottish aristocrats to now having a direct bloodline to the crown, which meant that members of her family had paid the price. And speaking to Margaret in the show, Queen Elizabeth had said their professionally diagnosed idiocy and imbecility would make people question the integrity of the bloodline. Can you imagine the headlines if we were to get it out? What would people say? Though, as it often is with secrets like that, the news did not get out until about 1987. But before we talk about exactly what happened and the reasons for it, let us tell you a little bit more about the women in question and their relation to the Queen. As stated in The Crown, there were 5 family members who had been admitted, but most articles mainly talk about Nerissa and Katherine. But we will talk about their first cousins, Idonia, Etheldreda, and Rosemary Fane later on, so make sure to stick around. They were 2 of the 5 daughters of John Herbert Bowes Lyon, who was the brother of the Queen Mother and therefore uncle to Queen Elizabeth II. Their mother was Fenella Trefusis, the daughter of the 21st Baron Clinton. The famous British tabloid The Sun was the first to break this story back in 1987, naming the Queen's cousins as Katherine and Nerissa, who had a mental age of a 3-year-old, and were secretly placed in the Royal Earlswood Mental Hospital back in 1941. At the time, they were 15 and 22 years old respectively. The story spoke in great detail about many devastating things, such as how the 2 were moved from the family home in Scotland to the hospital in Redhill, Surrey, and how their family had reported that they had passed away. In 1963, the family spoke with Burke Peerage, a publisher of books of the British aristocracy, and informed them that both sisters had passed away. Similarly, Debrett, a similar publisher, had dropped the names of both of the women back in the 50s. And as you can imagine, curious, since for a while they were reported as having passed away, the news came as a shock to the public. It was reported that an editor for Burke's was stunned at the fact that Bowes Lyon's family would have purposefully claimed that their own relatives had passed away, and thus erasing them from public records. Journalist Harold Brooks Baker had spoken with the Canadian newspaper Maclean's at the time of the news break-in and said that if this was what the family told them, they would have included it as not normal to doubt the word of the members of the royal family. According to the Canadian newspaper, the sisters were admitted to the hospital in secret by their mother Fenella. They had also stated that it was believed that she would visit the 2 of them until her passing in 1966, but as the news broke out in 87, it was added that the hospital had no records of the women having any visitors since then. And one sad part of the article was that Nerissa had passed away in 1986, just a year before the world had learned about them. Her funeral was attended by only a few of the nurses, and she was buried in Pauper's grave that was marked by a simple plastic marker. As you can imagine, all the information was shocking to the readers at the time, and as it surely would be to anyone who learned about it even now. Though if their story was unbelievable enough, it was also revealed that the same day that they were admitted to the hospital, so were 3 of their cousins, sisters Idoneia, Etheldreda, and Rosemary Fane. But they were cousins to Katherine and Nerissa, and thus had no connection to the Queen herself. After the news broke, genetic experts have claimed that the mental instability of the cousins was passed through their common maternal grandfather, who was Baron Clinton. They highlighted that the illness was not associated with the royal family, saying that the great relief is that the genes are obviously in the Clinton family and not in the royal family. And it just so happened that the aunt of Katherine and Nerissa was the patron for the Royal Society for Mentally Handicapped Children and Adults. But did she know what had happened to her nieces? After the story was initially made public, Buckingham Palace declined to comment on what was going on and instead called it an issue for the Bowes Lyon family. In turn, they had tried to salvage their image in one way or another, and a descendant of the family, Lady Elizabeth Anson, was left to explain her grandmother's actions. She had alleged that Fenella was a vague person who often did not fill out forms completely, and in reference to ones that she was sent by Burke's peerage. Though whether that was the case or it was intentional is something that we will never know, as people in question had actually already passed away, so some had suggested that it was done on purpose as a cover-up to preserve the purity of the family line, and Lord Clinton, who was related to the sisters, spoke with the Glasgow Herald touching on that matter and said, "It was forgetfulness. I really don't know. I don't think anybody will ever know. I don't think it was a cover-up though." However, an editor for Debrett's had said that an oversight like that doesn't usually happen, thus alleging to the fact that it was done on purpose. Though, unlike depicted in The Crown, it was not Princess Margaret who had found out about her relatives. It was reported that Queen Elizabeth, mother of the current queen, had been aware of the admittance of her nieces to the mental hospital since 1982, though it was not revealed how she had found out. An article from the Canadian newspaper had also stated that upon finding out that her nieces were, in fact, alive, she sent them a check which was allegedly used to buy candies and toys, but that she did not ever visit the relatives or correct the public record. So given that the article had stated that she found out, could mean that the family was also told that they had passed away. Or since it could be assumed that it was something talked about, so many might have forgotten about them. The editor from Debrett's had stated to them that it seemed that their mother had more or less rejected them in her mind as being her daughters. She had 5 daughters, and these 2 unfortunately seemed to be born mentally disturbed, and that in her own mind she shut them out. At the time when the world was buzzing with information, a hospital administration told the press that Katherine, who was still alive, was living in a 7-bed ward that had zero knowledge of her royal connection. The staff had given an interview to the press, seeing how everyone was concerned with the family members, and described her as an elderly, frail old lady, one who finds it very difficult perhaps to understand this sort of thing and what's going on in the world around her. She's really little more than a child, and they had also confirmed that the allegations that she had not been visited by any direct relatives since the 1960s, but did add that she would be visited by volunteers from different groups such as the League of Friends, and that she had got to go on vacation at the hospital's holiday home and other places. However, historians told Massons that it was a fairly standard practice all of those years ago. People went into long-stay mental handicapped hospitals, and into all intents and purposes, they were dead. It was never clearly reported on what had happened to their cousins, sisters Idoneia, Etheldreda, and Rosemary Fane, but according to the tab, Idoneia passed away in 2002. Katherine Bowes Lyon had passed away in 2014 at the age of 87. The royal family had never publicly acknowledged her existence throughout all of those years, even with the story coming out to light in the 1980s, and there had never been any official explanation from the palace or a more elaborated one from the Bowes Lyon side of the family, and so the public was left guessing why their relatives had made the decision to send them away and declare them as deceased. Though Peter Morgan, the creator of The Crown, hypothesized in the show that these women were hidden away for the reasons regarding the monarchy. For the start, the show had portrayed the divided opinions on the monarchy, and something like this could have had negative impacts. In the show, the Queen Mother had explained this in the season 4 episode, saying, "The idea that one family alone has the automatic birthright to the crown is already so hard to justify. The gene pool of that family better have 100% purity. There have been enough examples on the Windsor side alone to worry people. King George III, Prince John, your uncle. If you add Bowes Lyon illness to that, the danger as it becomes untenable." And with regards to Prince John, the case was true. He had suffered from epilepsy for most of his life, and the family had sent him to live with his hineni in a cottage on the Sandringham estate and seldom talked about him in public, once more giving voice to the rumors that the family gets rid of anyone who becomes uncomfortable for them. And if you want to know more about Prince John, then you can do so by checking out our previous video. So curious, what are your thoughts on the story? Were you aware that the story depicted in The Crown was actually real? Do you think it was done on purpose to protect the royal family? Or was it just forgetfulness like members of the Bowes Lyon family said it was? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our future videos. Until next time.